Welcome to Attached to Hygiene, the podcast that enables you to grow your knowledge and influence in the absorbent hygiene industry. My name is Jack Hughes, and my mission is to help you, the absorbent hygiene article producer, design and produce the best possible products to meet the needs of your consumers. 2 episodes ago, which was episode 30 for those of you following along, we shared a panel interview of absorbent incontinence product users from Europe, which was moderated by Cottenden. In the introduction to that episode, we explained why we thought it was so important to hear the stories and feedback of people who are actually using absorbent hygiene products, especially those users who are managing incontinence. We hope that the stories and product feedback that you heard were not only powerful, but also valuable, especially for those in our audience who are actually designing absorbent incontinence products. And to follow up on that panel interview, we're sharing another interview, again hosted by Cottenden, but this time featuring 3 panelists from North America. You'll hear how their stories and experiences are both similar and different to our 3 panelists from Europe, and once again, hear how they are managing their incontinence with absorbent products and what improvements they'd like to see in the products that are available on the market. If you didn't notice when you chose this episode to listen to, this will be our longest episode to date, with the interview itself coming in at over an hour long. We thought that the information and experiences that our panelists shared were too important and too valuable to cut into multiple episodes, so we're giving it to you all in a single episode. I hope you enjoy it and you find it as valuable as I did. Joining me today to help facilitate this discussion with some incontinence product users is Cottenden. Alan, before you introduce our panelists, I'd like to have you briefly introduce yourself. So welcome to the show and please introduce yourself.
Well, thank you very much. I am Emeritus Professor of Incontinence Technology at University College London, and I started out life training in materials science, but for the last 40 years or so, I've been focused on technology for managing continence. And of course, everybody who has incontinence would like to be cured. That would be the preferred outcome, but that's not always possible. And so if it isn't fully possible, then it's about minimizing the impact of that leakage that can't be sorted. And that's where I've chosen to focus in my career, on seeing what we can do to improve matters for people who rely on that sort of technology. And one of the key things that I've been involved in that process is talking with a lot of people like the folk that we have on the panel today who are product users to find out what matters to them, to find out what works well and what doesn't, and what their priorities are. So I'm absolutely delighted that we have 3 experienced product users today. And we have, first of all, Beth, who is from Arizona. We also have Twyla from Tennessee. And then there is Paul, who is from the Toronto area in Canada. So thank you to you 3 for being so willing to share your experiences with us. What I'm going to do is to ask them to tell us about how their bladders misbehave, what impact that has on their life, any restrictions and so on, before asking them how they currently manage things and how well that works or doesn't. And also ask them to just share with us what some of their dreams might be, the things that they would love to see improved or added to what products currently do for them. So I'd like to kick off with Paul first off. I wonder, Paul, could you just tell us how does your bladder misbehave and what's the impact on that for you?
Sure. So I've lived with incontinence and managed incontinence since I'm 22 years old. Back in the early days, we didn't have the products that we have today. So my bladder misbehaves because of a neurological problem. And at times it's worse and other times it's better. And in the mid-1980s, I was heavier. So by watching my diet and exercising, my bladder became more manageable. Since then, I have other underlying medical conditions that impact on bladder leakage. So today I have bladder leakage on a daily basis.
And that's interesting that you said it varies from day to day. So yours is not a consistent problem, so that it has the same impact on you every day. Is that right?
Yeah, well, it's consistent now, but it wasn't in the earlier days. I would say probably in the last 15 years, it's been consistent.
Okay, that's
Hey,
thank you. And how does that restrict you? Does that mean there are things that you can't do or that are a challenge to do?
if you would have asked me that question a number of years ago, yes, it really restricted my daily life. Today, I manage it well. And of course, there are restrictions that come into play. For example, I'm still working. I come out of retirement and I'm still working. So whenever I visit a facility, the first thing I do is check out where the washrooms are.
Right. I've come across a lot of people who carry a mental map of where all the washrooms are anywhere they ever go for exactly the reason you've just said. I can see what you mean. Well, thank you, Paul. Twyla, could we ask you to tell us about your bladder, please? What does that do?
I have, I think, the most irritating bladder ever established. I feel like there is a direct line from my stomach to my bladder. It doesn't go through the kidneys or anything else. It just straight lines right out, like down a drain. I can literally have half a glass of water with some pills and have to go to the bathroom like a minute and a half later. I don't know if it's mental. I don't know what the thing is. I went to a urologist and I told him that, and he did a bladder scan and said there's nothing wrong and said here's a pill for you. I said, but I've already tried that and that doesn't work. He goes, well, you need a double dose, and so that was the end of that.
Wow.
Now it's been since I was about 40. I really had some degree of it probably before that, before I knew there was a name for it. But maybe in my 40s, it started to get worse and worse. And now, believe me, I'll give you a brief anecdote. I was in Arizona about a month ago, and we got to Apache Junction, which was a good hour drive from Phoenix, when I realized I had not carried any spare pads with me. And I thought, I can't eat lunch. Too late, I've already eaten it and had a drink with
Okay.
it. And so I actually went to clerks in a couple of the general stores and said, do any of you have any personal stashes of pads? And one of them did. She handed me one from her storeroom. She went to the back room to her purse. I got one and I handed her $10. I said, thank you so much, you've saved my life.
Wow.
And that's how bad it is.
Wow.
I am grateful that there are pads and that there are things for us to use now.
Mhm.
I don't know how I'd face life without it. And like Paul, I know where all the bathrooms are. I basically shop in stores that have bathrooms. If your store doesn't have a bathroom, I'm not going to spend much time in
Can't
it.
use it so well, yeah. Twyla, does your bladder, is there an urgency about it? Is it you get very little warning of it needing to empty? Is that the way of it?
Exactly. And of course, when I'm working around the house, I'm standing up mostly, and that's when you can't control it. Now, if I'm sitting like I am now in front of the computer, I have a little more control. I'm not sure what anatomically that does,
Right.
but if I am out and I'm standing up and I'm like, oh God, here it comes.
Yeah.
If I can find a quick chair and sit down, it helps. But people that don't know me very well don't understand why I'm doing it. So the whole disclosure thing has been a little important for
Mm.
people that need to know.
Yeah.
So
Um,
how
it,
much warning do you get, Twyla? I mean, are we
well, like,
talking 10 seconds or a minute or
well, this morning I was just kind of paying attention to it, and so I'm like, oh damn, I have to go. I'm just in pajamas, and I get there and I'm literally, it's like 2 tablespoons, but it would have leaked
right?
if I hadn't
Okay.
gotten to the bathroom, which was literally 15 steps from the kitchen.
Okay, gotcha. So it's not necessarily a large quantity of urine, but you don't get much warning.
Right.
Is that
And
right?
it would be
Okay.
enough if I weren't wearing a pad, it would be enough to show.
Gotcha.
But
Okay.
it's not enough to have a need to go to the bathroom. If I'm driving somewhere, I can make my bladder wait for a while, but I'm
Okay.
sitting.
Yeah. Gotcha. Gotcha. Okay, thank you for that. I wonder, Beth, if you could, your story's a little different, perhaps.
Yeah, I
Tell
think
us
so.
about your misbehaving bladder.
Well, mine is a stress incontinence. I first was introduced to it when I was pregnant with my third child 30 years ago. And I was sitting in the back seat of a car and I sneezed really hard. And I was probably in my final trimester and lost it. And I was like, oh my goodness. I know. And so for the rest of the pregnancy, I had to really try to remember to go to the bathroom a lot more often. If my bladder started getting full and I sneezed or I coughed, stretched, something was going to happen. After the pregnancy was over, I was doing my Kegels and lost weight and was fine until about 2 years ago. Something happens when you hit 65. It's like a gong goes off. And all of a sudden, I started having the same kind of issues. If I didn't pay attention to my bladder, that it was saying, hey, I'm full, you better go inside. And I'd be outside gardening like Twyla. I'm an avid gardener. And I'd sneeze because I'd get pollen up me. Oh my goodness, there we go. I'm soaked. I now have gotten better at, I think, do toilet mapping so much, but I've got to have a clock going all the time and not go beyond a certain number of hours, like about 3.5. I need to get myself to the bathroom. Otherwise, the next sneeze or the next cough, I'm going to be wet. So there are weeks where I'm really in charge and I don't have anything. And then I have another week where I'm leaking every day. Something happens. So I wear a light pad constantly because I never know when it's going to happen. And I'm lucky at this point. It's very light. It's a small amount. But like Twilight, it's enough that if I didn't have a pad on, I'd have to change my clothes. So I know that my weight, my age, the 3 pregnancies, all those kinds of things usually do add up for women at my age for some stress incontinence. So I'm just at this point just dealing with it, realizing I need to do my Kegels. I need to probably lose some weight. And that's where I'm at right now.
Gotcha. So I'm guessing that means if you have a cough or a cold, that's a particular challenge because you're more likely to sneeze and do other things that raise your abdominal pressure. Is that true?
Right. Yeah, I'm finding where I live, we have a lot of high tree pollen right now, Alan. And so I'm having violent sneezing attacks sometimes. And again, if I have not taken care of my bladder, I'm going to have an issue. Fortunately, I guess because of the pandemic, I haven't had a cold in the last couple of years. I've been masking and doing my vaccines and stuff. So
I mean, there must be a plus in there somewhere from the pandemic.
Yeah.
You just identified it.
Yeah, so I haven't had a cold. I just have my wonderful allergies. So
Gotcha. There's something that a couple of you had mentioned I'd just like to pick up on. I can't remember which of you mentioned it first, but the whole business of some kind of secrecy. Is the way your bladder misbehaves, is that something I imagine you might be quite careful about who you tell, or maybe you choose to tell hardly anybody, or maybe you feel it's kind of like a guilty secret that you're living with. How does that, would you like to speak first, Beth? How does that work for you?
I guess because of my age and because of my background and just my personality, it isn't something I hide. And
Right.
it's funny because a lot of my friends are the same age and we make jokes. I mean, we kid about the fact that, hey, if I don't get to the bathroom every so often and on a timely basis, I'm going to have trouble. And we laugh. And I do go to a yoga class, and our yoga instructor is always saying, okay, gals, this is for your pelvic floor. This is a good exercise. And we all know if we don't take care of our pelvic floor, what's going to happen to us. And we all laugh because we all know it's not a secret. Yeah, we don't talk about it a lot, but we're all very much aware of it. So I feel comfortable, I guess, with the people that are my peers and who are around me, that if something happens or, we talk about it, I'm very comfortable with it.
Yeah. And the family knows?
No, let's see. Probably my sister-in-law does, but I haven't really discussed it with them at this point.
Hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. How about you, Twyla? Is that an issue for you? Is that something that you talk about freely, or are you very careful about what you say to who?
Well, the people that know me, that I know pretty well now, most of them are in on the whole thing. When I would be driving to a curling tournament and have a team with me, or be with a team that somebody else was driving, we didn't pass any rest areas. And it's like, I'm sorry folks, but I have to go always. So you must pull in.
Yeah.
And my husband finally realized it wasn't a pretty picture. He didn't, if he insisted on passing any rest area, he was going to be sorry.
Right.
There's not many cornfields close enough to an interstate, let's face it. So, and having had some revelation about when you do let people in on it, it becomes a little easier to
Mhm,
manage, if people do know and they can understand it.
mhm.
It becomes a lot easier to deal with than if you're constantly the only one who knows about it. And
Yeah.
so I found that the more people that I'm likely have to have issues around, the more people that can understand that, the better off I am.
Yeah. Makes it easier for you, I guess, to do what you need to do if you don't have to worry too much about what other people might be thinking.
Yeah, if they
Yeah.
already know about it. So I have a friend here who is from my hometown who just had a surgical implant of something that the nerve that comes out of the bottom of your, like up your leg.
Hmm.
They put an implant in her hip that affects that nerve with a little bit of a
Yeah.
current.
Okay.
And that hadn't even heard of it. So I looked at her material,
Hmm.
but I see that you can't have an MRI,
Hmm.
or
Okay.
maybe not a CAT scan. So some of those things you can't have if you have that implant.
There are some consequences. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Can I
I
just
feel like with my back issues and maybe a hip coming up, that I might
right.
not it might not be the wisest solution, but she has been very happy with that.
There
And
are all sorts of issues to take into account, aren't there, in these
yeah.
things? I
Uh-huh.
wonder if Paul, can we just ask Paul, is it different for men, Paul? I mean, there's two ladies have said they seem to be quite happy about sharing things. Is there a guy thing about this where it's harder or
I
easier?
think so. I think you're right. Some years ago, I didn't share my problems with anybody, even those closest to me in the family. But today, I share my incontinence with all my family,
Mhm.
friends, and even colleagues.
Yeah.
So if the subject ever comes up, I'm very comfortable in discussing it with them.
Do the grandkids know?
Oh, yes, they do.
Yeah. And what do they have to say about it? Is that something they take seriously, or is it a little bit of a laughing matter to them? How do they?
Oh, yeah, my grandson especially, he's always wanting to look after his grandparents, and he's always on the internet looking for solutions to
Ah.
help you. Yeah, it's incredible.
Well, it's good to know the next generation is taking care of you. I'm
Yes,
glad
absolutely.
glad to hear about that.
Paul, you said it for the longest time you didn't share, and then recently you've started to open up. Was there something that prompted that?
Yeah, I think well, initially I thought that I was alone. Never knew of any other man that had this problem, or woman for that matter. And so I kept it hidden. And then back in the early 80s, when I found out about the Simon Foundation, that started a path for me to open up. It wasn't an easy path, but it all worked out in the end.
Good, good. Thank you.
That's it's very interesting, isn't it? How they can be these trigger events, trigger things that kind of
Yeah. And,
catapult us through to a
and I have a wonderful spouse that has helped me all along for years. And that was very encouraging for me too.
yeah. No, that must be a great support.
Yes.
Can you tell us, Paul, about how you manage things at the moment? So you leak or you might leak. So how do you manage that, and how well does it work or not?
Sure. So there's different situations that arise in my daily life. I'm very active physically, and I used to run marathons right up until 20 years ago. And I managed to run marathons even with bladder leakage and coped like that. But today I walk a lot. I walk for an hour and 20 minutes every morning. And I'm a bike rider. So I ride when I can, like for 2.5 hours. So of course I have significant leakage when I'm active. And I also have an underlying medical problem of COPD, and that aggravates the bladder as well, especially when I'm coughing or sneezing and exerting myself physically. That impacts on the bladder. So I manage daily with products, and every day is different. So I might use a lighter product for when I'm at work, and like Twyla described earlier, that when you're sitting, it tends to help any leakage, but when you stand up, and a good example of that is at nighttime. I don't normally have bladder leakage when I'm laying down, but the minute that I rise from bed, that's when I have significant leakage.
Okay. So does that mean that you wear something when you're laying down, ready
Yeah.
for when you do sit up? Is that?
Yeah, I wear something 24 hours.
Got you.
Yeah.
So it sounds like rather than having one product that you use all the time, you have, I don't know, 2 or 3 different ones, and
Yeah.
which you use according to the situation. Is that
Correct. Probably 5 or 6 different products.
5 or 6? Wow.
Yeah.
You're a real specialist. So can you tell us what determines which one you're wearing right now for whatever you're doing?
So it's something very light
Yeah,
because I'm working from home, and the washroom is right around the corner.
yeah,
So, and I watch what I'm drinking. If, for example, if I'm in a meeting like this for a couple of hours, I will restrict the fluids for a couple hours before. But when I'm out exercising or bike riding, especially, I'm really hydrating. So I'm leaking more because I'm exerting myself and hydrating at the same time. So
okay,
I'll wear something a little bit heavier.
yeah. And then if you were on a, say, in a trip driving somewhere, or maybe you were going on a plane, what would you do then?
So getting on an airplane is quite an experience when you have incontinence,
Hmm.
because the X-ray machines can pick up what you're wearing,
Yeah.
and they will normally pull you aside and frisk you. So that can be embarrassing. But from what I hear, they see that quite often. So when I'm traveling by plane, for example, when I'm going through the check-in or the X-ray, I'll wear something extremely light.
Okay.
And once I get through the check-in, then I'll put something a little bit more absorbent on.
Gotcha. That's a clever trick. Yeah. Yeah.
And then traveling by automobile, for example, I live in Windsor, which is about 4 hours from Toronto. So if I'm traveling to Toronto for work, then I will wear something quite heavy.
Okay. Okay. And by heavy, you mean presumably high absorbency, so it's something that's going to cope with your leakage over
That's correct.
quite a period of time. I got it. Wow. So presumably then when you travel, or particularly when you say go on vacation, you need to take quite a supply with you then, do you?
Yeah. That's because especially if you're traveling out of country, down the Caribbean or wherever, I'm not sure what's available in those countries for
Hmm.
products.
Hmm. Yeah.
I do bring with enough for the holiday.
Yeah. Gotcha. So that might be an extra case, I guess.
Yes.
Gotcha. How about you, Beth? What's your plan for management? Can you beat Paul's 6 different products?
No.
I think that's the record that I've heard of, but maybe you're going to push it up to 7. Tell us.
No, no. Right now, all I need is a real thin pad, a small light day, because when I do sneeze, I'm only losing maybe a tablespoon or so,
Yeah.
not a lot. So that right now is what accommodates me. And like I said, the only time I have to change it is if once I have an accident or, a sneeze or a cough.
Yeah.
And there are days where it never gets used, but it's got to be there.
Yeah.
So that's it right now for me.
Okay. So you're
I'm
wearing it.
I'm
So
hoping it progress, but
right. So I was going to say you're wearing it in case. So oftentimes when
always, yeah.
you throw it away, maybe dry, but you've got to wear it in case. And would
Right.
it normally be the case that you wearing it for more than one accident, or do you tend to change it pretty much as soon as you're aware that there's anything
Oh,
there?
I change it right away. I mean, they always say that you shouldn't have that moisture next to you. And
Yeah.
being female, we're so set up for UTIs, and I've had enough of them in my life. I sure don't want to create a problem for myself. So no, it gets changed right away, or as soon as I get to a bathroom. Yep.
And I'm guessing that the quantity of urine you're talking about, although it's quite small, that's enough for there to be an embarrassing wet patch in clothing or
Oh
whatever.
yeah.
Yeah,
Oh yes,
yeah,
definitely. Definitely. Yeah.
yeah.
So that's why I never go out without it anymore. It's probably been at least a solid year that I've just never chanced it anymore.
Okay, gotcha,
Yeah.
gotcha.
Beth, are you using a pad that is specific for incontinence, or do you tend to use like menstrual products?
Oh no, it's a product for incontinence because I know that the menstrual pads don't absorb the same way. It's not the same kind of viscosity. So I know that you need to use appropriate products. So no, I've never used a menstrual pad.
Okay.
Yep.
But you're right, Jack. I mean, it's very well known that the market for menstrual products is a good deal higher than it should be. You can work out what it ought to be, and it's pretty well established that a lot of them are used for incontinence because, again, the ladies will know better than I. You feel less embarrassed in the checkout queue at the drugstore if you have a pack of menstrual pads under your arm compared with something that says incontinent on the side. I guess is the reason. How about you, Twyla? Can you tell us about your regime?
Well, I have everything from pull-up that I bought a package of when I was having knee surgery, and I thought, now this could be a problem, especially having to jump up in the middle of the night and try to make it to the bathroom. Which, in the best of days, like Paul, I definitely have a problem, and I really right now should be wearing a light pair of underwear. I just resist because another thing around on, and I love the freedom of pajamas, but I'm reaching the stage where it's an ensuite, and I still once in a while, like for instance, if I stumble or I walk into the side of the door or something, that seems to release it.
Okay.
I don't. You can hold it if you can manage, but I have everything from light pads and moderate pads, and then the pull-ups, which I honestly didn't have to use very often because the pads usually took care of them. The issue that I have is I don't ever know how bad it's going to be. So if I think I'm going to be okay with a light pad because I'm going to be, for instance, working the front desk at our community center, and I believe that I'll be able to go to the bathroom whenever I feel like it.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, then sometimes there's three people standing in line waiting for something, and the urge strikes, and you're like, oh boy,
Yeah.
oh boy.
Yeah.
And the other times when I don't know, maybe I've been holding it for a while, and then I still had to stand up and I couldn't get to the bathroom right away, and you kind of flood it. That is a real issue because sometimes it overflows for how fast it goes,
Yeah.
even though you have plenty of capacity
Yeah.
in the product. It doesn't always absorb sideways fast enough, the lengthwise.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I just find that there's just so many myriad issues that
Yeah.
it's completely frustrating. If you
Yeah.
could just
Yeah.
have a little window into what the day was going to be like ahead of time, but you can't.
Yeah.
So I
I
feel like I should always have maybe I should always have the pull-ups on. I don't know, but
yeah. Yeah.
it's really irritating.
Do you know, Twyla, that's very clever of you because you just answered a couple of questions I was going to ask you. That's a real skill you have there to answer questions before they get asked. I was going to say two things. One was, I think oftentimes people kind of confuse or conflate volume and flow rate because you can have a very high flow rate but a small volume. You have it all at once. But also you can have a larger volume, but release rather slowly. And you just made the important point that sometimes the problem is the flow rate rather than the volume. You've got a sizable product on, but it just comes so quickly that it can't cope with the flow. So that was the first thing that I was going to ask about, and you already answered. And the second thing was I was going to say to you, do you know in advance roughly what your bladder is going to do? Because some people do, don't they? But if you don't, then I'm guessing that you really have to prepare for what might be the worst, even if it turns out to be overkill. But you don't know
Traveling,
that. Is that
I
right?
know I'm going out for the day with
Yeah.
last couple weeks ago, I went with a couple other friends to a kind of a greenhouse, a nursery tour. So we were making 3 stops or so.
Yeah.
And thank God the one place had porta potties, because I would have been really screwed because it was the first thing in the morning and that wouldn't have worked out at all. But like you, Beth, I have the issues of sometimes I have to sit with it wet because there's no convenient place to change.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and I'm lucky, I guess, that I haven't had a lot of problems with bladder infections,
Mm-hmm.
UTIs, that
Yeah.
I'm really good that way. But I know if you start having them, you are more predisposed to them. So I count my blessings there.
Mm-hmm.
But I do find that I get skin irritation if you have to spend some time with a wet one.
Mm-hmm. You just did it again, Twyla. My next thing I was going to ask was, can you tell me about wet comfort and skin irritation? This is something people talk about, but is it an issue for you 3 guys? Paul, well, perhaps you take a lead on that.
Skin irritation, no, I've never had that problem. I don't know if I have a tough skin or whatever. I tend to not stay in a wet product for a prolonged period. For me, mornings are worse than afternoons and evenings.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, not quite sure why, except I think the kidneys are working better in the mornings, and but the afternoons and evenings are best for me.
Paul, does that mean that you tend to wear something more absorbent the first half of the day than the latter half? Or
Yes, it does.
it is, okay.
It does.
Okay. Wowee.
And
How about you, Beth? Is skin an issue for you? Wet comfort?
Yes, I'm a redhead, so I have very sensitive skin everywhere. So yeah, I seem to notice right away if something is wet, even if it's just that I've been outside working and it's sweaty and it's getting that pad wet. I know I need to change it because my skin's going to tell me about it. So I have to be very careful with that. And it kind of brings up, I'm hoping I'm not jumping ahead on a question.
Well, there's a challenge from Twyla. You've got to answer the question I was about to ask, right? Go for it.
One of the things that I have problems with, especially with, I guess, because I'm wearing a small pad, is it's not a lot of adhesive on it. And so it tends to move around in the panty. And so that creates irritation and friction. And I'm always wishing that there was more adhesive that would just stay put and not be moving around a little bit on me as I'm doing something, because I'm still very mobile. I'm very active. So I'm moving around. So that can also, just the fact that it's loose and it moves around inside the panty can create irritation for me and set me up. Yeah.
If I could just ask you, is the movement that it's kind of scrunching up from front to back or side to side, or is it that the tail is wagging around?
It's side to side.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's side to side, not front to back. And then, sometimes I find that it's completely come loose,
Okay.
So, yeah, but it's definitely a side to side.
So securing in place is an issue for you.
Yeah.
Got it. How about you, Twyla? How's the comfort thing for you? Is that an issue with skin?
I think I wear close enough fitting underwear that it keeps it in place pretty well. Once in a while, I have a problem with the sticky part. I don't know why this happens, but it appears to be more when the pad is wet and has stayed wet. When I try to peel it off, it wants to stick to the underwear, and it becomes a problem if the back of that backing peels off.
Okay.
So that's a problem I have once in a while.
Well, that's interesting. So this whole business of securing products in place, then you mentioned there are different ways that this might not quite work for you. You've actually prompted me to ask something else, which I've always been fascinated by, and I'd love to have your take on this, is how much wet comfort is physical and how much it is psychological. Now, what I mean by that is, so I've just peed into my pad. Is my discomfort because I know in my head that my pad is wet, or is it because physically I can feel the discomfort? Do you have any answer to that, or have I just completely? Beth is looking very confused. Have I?
Well, no, I think it's a combination of both. I mean,
Okay.
Yeah,
I think
and
I
I
know
agree.
that it's wet. I can
Yeah.
kind of feel that it's wet. I mean, the products do a pretty good job of pulling it away from you, but
Yeah.
I know it's wet. So I
Right.
think it's really a combination of both things in my case.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I
With
think
that.
when they're especially wet, that's when I notice it more physically. And then also because you've already expelled a fair volume, now you're also terrorized about what might happen next. I,
Okay. Okay.
you know,
Yeah, I can see
if you
that
can
too.
get changed, that's it's better. But if you can't, then it's a psychological issue there too, worrying about whether you'll withstand another one without showing on your clothes.
Yeah, gotcha. That makes good sense. Can I ask you folks about something else again, and that is the issue of discretion. So, of the extent to which people, for example, may be able to see that you're wearing a product under your clothes. So, do you modify what you wear? Do you feel you need to modify what you wear to disguise things a little, or does that not restrict your clothing? Yeah, go for it, Paul.
Sure. So I tend to wear dark clothing, and I try to disguise as much as I can by wearing dark clothing.
Yeah,
And that does a couple of things. If there are any external leaks in your clothing, it's not as visible as might be with lighter clothing.
yeah,
And also, I tend to wear shirts and tops that will hide some of the bulk if there is any bulk there.
gotcha. So it does affect what you can wear, but you choose carefully to disguise things a little.
Yeah, I have a huge wardrobe, and I, I've never had to discount any function that I attend because I have enough clothing that will disguise any
Anything you
leaks or
got going. Now, what you're going to tell me, you've got a different wardrobe depending on which of the 6 products you're using today, right?
correct.
That's very impressive.
Yeah.
You must be a very easy person to buy a Christmas present for in the clothing line if you need that variety. How about you, Beth? Do things affect you in that way?
Not at this point because the pads are so small, but it's
Okay.
not the visibility, it's the sound
Oh,
that
okay.
I don't like to hear crinkling.
Okay.
So,
That's just the sound of the plastic backing as you're walking or whatever, yeah?
yeah, I don't want anybody to hear it. Right.
Okay.
Yeah. But as far as visibility, of course, with a small pad, there just really isn't anything at this point. But I
Right.
definitely am conscious about noise.
So that's interesting. So discretion isn't just visibility, it's also noise is another
Yeah,
angle
right.
on that. That's true. How
And of
about
course, discretion would also be you don't want any odor. I
right?
mean,
Is that
that's another facet of it. That's another reason why you want to change it too. You want to make sure there's no odor.
okay? And is
Yeah.
that something that you were aware of, or do you try to be aware of whether you might possibly smell?
Well, I think because at this point it's not a huge problem. I'm pretty sure that I don't, but I want to make sure that I don't ever.
Yeah,
So I'm going to change it. But
yeah,
it is something that I'm aware of it though is the sound. I want to make sure that I have it placed or whatever I'm wearing that there's not going to be any sound from it. So
gotcha. Yeah.
Can I ask a follow-up question on that? Have,
sure.
have you found certain brands, and you don't have to name brands, but have you found that certain brands are quieter than others, and have you made purchasing decisions based off of that?
I've only used 2 brands. And the only reason I've kind of gone back and forth is to see which one actually adheres better. And I haven't really noticed any real difference as far as the sound level. I would think that if I went to much cheaper products, that I would probably hear more noise. But I'm at this point willing to pay for the high end.
Yeah. Just back to the sound, Beth, I have this wonderful picture in my mind of you in a drugstore going up and down the aisles and scrunching the thing by your ear to see what you can hear. You know, I imagine you would have a scale, you know, that you give this a 5, this one's a 6.
Yeah, the only problem is that most of those small ones are individually wrapped so that you can put them in a purse.
Well, there you go. So you've got the sound of the wrapping as well.
Yeah, that stuff makes a terrible noise. Yeah.
How about you, Twyla, on the odor front? Is that an issue for you?
Well, it's an issue for anybody, but I have an especially worse problem because I lost my sense of smell about 12 or 13 years ago. I can't smell anything. I don't smell skunks on the side of the road. I don't smell gentlemen who release gas and think it's funny, like my husband, but it pretty much ruined his life when I lost my sense of smell because he couldn't sidle up next to me and do that. But I know you're all laughing because I know you all know about it. So
there you go. The secret's out now.
So, you know, it's an especial worry because if you are wet, I could never smell it.
Yeah.
That's a little bit more subtle than some things you might smell. And I can't, you know, the most beautiful smelling flowers, you know, oriental lilies, I can't smell them.
Right.
It's very disappointing to me.
Yeah. Thank you. That's helpful. Isn't it very interesting, again, going back to smell, you know, that a lot of this is about perception, you know, fear of smelling, or that you might smell. You're going to err on the side of caution. I mean, very understandably, but I think it's a very interesting thing you're saying.
Well, that's an issue, Alan. I think the wetness issue of showing on your clothing is still number one.
Okay.
That's always going to be number one.
Would you say that the products that you use at the moment sometimes fail you on that, or are they pretty good?
Well, the problems that I have are with, I don't know exactly how to explain, but sometimes you just release more. I tend to be more of a constant little problem that just builds up. But sometimes you've gone to lunch, you're really thirsty, you had a nice big Diet Coke or something, and then, you know, a half hour later, the Diet Coke all wants out on me. It's like nothing reserves. I feel like I spend half my life dehydrated, maybe more than half. I tend to try not to have anything to drink like a half an hour before I go out to work outside, because having to remove my shoes each time I have to run into the bathroom. It's really frustrating.
So it makes everything take a bit longer and less convenient.
Yeah, I try not to have anything to drink an hour before I go outside, at least, so it has time to empty out.
Gotcha. Something I'd like you guys to focus on now, if you will, is that we're hoping that a lot of the people who are going to be listening to what you have to say on things are going to be creative people who are very interested in making products work better, or understanding quite what the priorities and the needs are and so on. So it'd be really helpful if you could say to us, I would love it if, and some aspect of the products you use that maybe you would like to work a little better or differently. Or maybe there are things they really don't do very well at all at the moment that you would love to add it in there. So without worrying too much about quite how these miracles are going to be performed, if you had a kind of a wish list of it would be great if, what would you say?
So like I said earlier, I use up to 6 different products. So one of the issues that I have is I love using the pull-ups, for example. But when I'm out in a public setting and I need to change the product in the men's room, that becomes an issue with me because then you have to remove your pants, your shoes, and not your socks, obviously, but your shoes, and then discard the product and then put a new pull on. So if I'm faced with a situation like that, then I prefer to use a product that's tape on. so that I don't have to remove my shoes and pants in order to change. It's quicker
Yeah.
and it's less humiliating, because then you have to carry the product out of the stall that you're in and discard it in the waste receptacle.
Yeah.
And if the washroom is used by several different men, it's even more challenging for me.
Mm-hmm.
I really like the pull-on style of the briefs that are available today, and I prefer to use those, but there are situations where I can't use those. And other issues that I have with the pull-on style is the elastics in the legs and in the waist. I find I maybe have a unique body style. I have very narrow legs or thin legs, and so sometimes there's leakage there that comes out the leg.
So that's down to the fit and the challenge of how you can get products like that to fit everybody without
Correct.
having a million different sizes, I guess.
Yeah.
And back to your first point, Paul, I think you're saying, therefore, what you would like to see is the functional performance of the pull-on, but without the inconvenience of having to take the whole thing off when you change it. Have I heard you correctly?
Correct.
Okay. Gotcha. Understand. I've got a feeling that Jack were you going to ask something, Jack? You look like you were thinking creative thoughts there.
Yeah, it was actually that question. Essentially, there are certainly trade-offs that you have to weigh, whether it's the convenience of a tape style diaper that maybe isn't as comfortable, but versus a pull-on style product that's more comfortable, but it's much more inconvenient to dispose of.
Interesting.
Yeah, changing them is really, I mean, that's the issue. Like, I don't know about you, Paul, but I wouldn't really want to take my pants down in a lot of bathrooms because sometimes the floors are really awful.
Well, especially
Okay.
your shoes. You don't want to take your shoes off in a
No,
public.
you don't want to stand on the floor.
Yeah.
Right.
A lot of times the floors are wet.
Gotcha.
And,
Gotcha.
that's especially
That's very interesting, isn't it? Because what you're reminding us, of course, is that an important part of product use is the environment in which it's going to be used. That's part of the design challenge, isn't it?
Yes.
You got to use it in the context that you need to. What would be your dream, Twyla? What would you love to see?
I think the one thing that would help me more than anything else is the ability for that to transfer the liquid lengthwise a little better than to all be in one concentrated spot
Okay.
when you have a larger release.
Mm-hmm.
Mine do overflow out. Even when I have on the larger pads, it'll sometimes overflow over the edge. And once in a while is enough to be on your clothing a little.
Right. Go on.
Not sure how that would work, but it would be something that would transfer. It would be something that did the lengthwise part of the pad somehow that would transfer it. Like they had some sort of a mechanism that transferred it along the full length of it, as opposed
Gotcha.
to staying in the middle.
There'll be some kind of magic that will climb the fluid uphill from front to back rather than the easier route to the sides.
There might be the ability to put a different kind of absorbent core in there that would
Yeah.
transfer that to the other product. Because
Yeah.
I rarely get one wet enough to wet the whole thing over time.
Yeah.
And honestly, you always are peeing in the same place. So if
Yeah.
it doesn't transfer, sooner or
Yeah.
later you're going to overflow.
Gotcha. And from what you were saying, Twyla, earlier, it's maybe a particular challenge when your flow rate is high. You said sometimes it's just the
Right.
rate of arrival. Is that
Yeah.
correct?
I have the annoying little discharges frequently, and I have also got sometimes a major one.
Okay, so again, that's interesting, isn't it? So sometimes we're talking about might be accumulation of quite a big volume, but it's in lots of little leakages, and then sometimes you get a whole lot all at once, and that's a different challenge for a
Right.
product.
And I know you think I'm clairvoyant because I anticipate your questions, but if I were truly clairvoyant, I would know which day that was going to be.
Well, there we are. That's your challenge. That's how you have to develop your skill over the next while. We'll
See.
test you again in a while. Yeah. How about you, Beth? Have you got a dream? what would
Well, I guess I've probably mentioned, the couple of things that I'd like to see improved, but could I speak as a caregiver and
absolutely
as,
go for it.
yeah, okay, and as a person that works at the Simon Foundation, I hear complaints, people looking for changes and, or what's really bugging them with a product. And so from that vantage point, the biggest thing I think is, especially for men and some for women, but especially for men, that I'm hearing that they need a thinner product. They want to be able to go out in public and wear the clothes that they've always worn,
Okay.
and not have this bulky stuff underneath, especially for the gentlemen who have a huge release that is overwhelming sometimes for products. But oh my goodness, if they could have something that was thin and made them feel kind of normal, that would be awesome. And then I really understand what Twyla's talking about as a caregiver, especially for somebody who's bedridden. It seems like even if you wear a super bulky overnight product, it's still, the urine is all concentrated pretty much in one area, and it is overwhelmed if a person is sleeping well overnight. And there's a whole half of a product that's hardly wet, So yeah, that whole idea of trying to get the absorbency to go out long and sideways, so that all of that product actually gets used and the person then doesn't have a problem with a wet bed in the morning.
Gotcha. And one of the things that you, right at the beginning of what you said, is that you would love it to be the case that could result in products that are less bulky in terms of visibility beneath clothing.
For somebody who's ambulatory, that would be really, I think that's the biggest issue that I hear from men, is especially the younger men who want to be out and you're really, active, working, to try and minimize that visibility. So, I mean, I know we've come a long way in the last few years with absorbents and thinner products, but they want them even thinner.
Yeah, gotcha. Well, at the risk of you taking over with clairvoyancy from Twyla, you've raised something that I was going to ask there. I mean, I hope Twyla isn't feeling displaced from her Queen of Clairvoyance role, but there we are. I was going to say, how much is over the last, say, 10 years or so, there's been quite a lot of companies have moved in the direction of products that look more like regular underwear, and in particular men's absorbent products that are now in greys and blacks and blues rather than clinical white and so on. Is that a good thing, or do you think that's an irrelevant? What do you think, Paul?
Yeah, I think it's a good thing. And I want to add something to what Beth and Twyla added.
Okay.
I'm particularly fond of a product that's made by a company. However, I find that the product itself is wonderful. Okay, it's wonderful for viewing. I don't feel uncomfortable wearing it in front of my wife, for example, but it doesn't go far enough up the back.
Oh, okay.
And the difficulty I have with that is, for example, if I'm out bike riding and I'm having leakage, it's going to show. It's going to show at the.
Gotcha. Yeah. So you need a bike rider's pad. That's what you need, Paul.
Yeah. Or a generic product that works both ways. I understand why there's more padding in the front because for a male, but when you reach the capacity of the product, it's going to leak, and where it's going to leak is in the back.
Yeah, gotcha.
No, can I ask you a question?
Yeah, go on, Twyla.
I don't want to interrupt you if you've got something that you want to ask first, but
well, you would know that already, wouldn't you? Being clairvoyant queen,
Paul, it reminded me just now of one of my coworkers on my committee. Her husband has had recurring bouts of problems with prostate cancer, metastasizing and being here, there, and yon. And he's had some recent radiation, and he's having a lot of, I think, both urinary but especially bowel issues.
Okay.
Now, as a result of that, and she was saying how often they have to carry clothes with them, and he has to change that a lot. And can't imagine what a mess that is. to be out somewhere and have bowel incontinence.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Is that something, Twyla, that you have to deal with, or is your bowel not misbehaving that way?
No, I actually did have a couple of years ago when we were working on a big project, and I was up there, and I had to go up in Chicago a couple times.
Uh-huh.
I had 6 months, literally 6 months of diarrhea that they couldn't seem to get a handle on. They tried everything.
Gosh.
And finally, after 6 months, they put me on a medication that essentially seemed pretty much like the over-the-counter stuff that just slows down your bowel action.
Okay.
And for whatever reason, it finally cleared up, but nothing worked, literally. And I was at my wit's end.
And it sounds like you found that was a big challenge then, managing that.
It was a terrible challenge. I missed a meeting because I got stuck in a traffic jam, and I had to go, and there was no getting out of the traffic.
Gotcha.
It was just, when you have to stop for an hour and stay in place, that was a bad thing. What I thought about with this, Paul, with you talking about the issues with pull up versus tape on.
Yeah.
It's what I said to my friend was, well, he needs to understand that he has to find a product that works for him. It's so much better to find a product that you can contain what's coming out of you rather than have to change your clothes and clean yourself off. It's so much better to keep it contained in a product. And I said, look, if he has to use like toddler sized diapers with tape, I said, that's better than a pull up.
Okay. If that works better.
Get that down without getting all over you.
Gotcha.
And so,
true.
that just reminded me of that's another issue.
I think something else that you raised there, Twyla, is that it is amazing how creative people are at finding solutions that work best for them. And it may be, real put together homemade stuff. But if that provides the best solution, well, there are at least some insights there on what matters and what the priorities are.
Yeah, and God help the manufacturers, because like her husband is like 6'3" and like a linebacker.
Okay.
So you have everything from, teensy to monstrous to have to deal with, and men and women both.
Yeah, no, that's a challenge. I wonder if is there any last things that you would want to add to your wish list, folks? Any other things that have occurred to you as we've been discussing where you say, oh, this is my opportunity to say it would be good if. Paul, have you got anything you would want to add in there?
No, I think keep up the good work. Products have come a long way since even in the last 20 years. And with the super absorbent polymers that are used in the products, they've been a boon to people living with incontinence. The only thing that I would suggest with that is to spread the super absorbent polymers throughout the padding and not just concentrate it in one area.
Okay, that relates to what Twyla was saying earlier, doesn't it, about where you have the absorbency and so on. But but thank you also, Paul, for mentioning that things have come a long way, haven't they? So I think with gratefulness toward the manufacturers who've taken us to where we are. There's still some way to go in some of the things that we talked about, but there's been a lot of progress, which is great.
Yeah.
Is there anything you would want to add, Beth?
Yeah, there is one thing that I noticed as a caregiver, and that was the heat buildup underneath the product. Just constantly. I mean, I know it's a fine balance to make sure that product doesn't leak, but at the same time, especially in the summertime, how hot it gets underneath some of these products. And I've noticed that as a caregiver, I was like, oh my gosh, there's just so much heat built up. And again, that leads to, tissue breakdown and problems. Right. So, and I've heard that also from other people too, that, in the summer, it can get just so uncomfortable because of the heat. So breathability, I guess, is, still incredibly important too, for the comfort of the person wearing the product.
Beth, is that something you particularly notice when you change products, that the torso of the person was really hot. Is that how it worked?
Yeah, I would notice that the torso, but even just the product was so
Okay.
so
Right.
hot. Yeah.
Gotcha. So there's an issue of temperature, dealing with the
Yeah.
temperature. Okay,
So
gotcha.
that always made
Right.
me concerned that heat buildup could cause
Yeah.
some real skin irritation.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah.
How about you, Twyla? Is there anything that you'd like to mention that you haven't already?
I'm grateful for what's been done already. I'm not sure how much difference there is in the surface of material of a product. I'm making a gesture and I know you can't see it, but when it's against your skin, it really needs to be smooth. And I might be able to detect some slight differences in the material that is actually against your skin.
Okay.
And, so I'm not sure whether it's because of the dampness or because of, I mean, usually the fabric is designed to wick it away
Uh-huh.
and try to keep it away from the dampness away from you. But
Yeah.
sometimes I think that some are a little better than others for easiness on the skin.
Do you mean by that, Twyla, that there's a rough feel to it, or do you mean that it kind of clammy, sticky, or what? What can you tell us?
I just think abrasive to a
Okay.
small degree.
Okay.
It's not really abrasive, but some are not as gentle as others.
Okay, got you. So that's something, and that's an issue of relating to comfort, is it?
Well, long-term comfort. I mean, I sometimes have to use like Vaseline or something to
Mhm.
kind of cover my skin with
Okay,
because it gets irritated.
okay, got you. So it's not just comfort; it's also skin health. It's you can
Right.
get irritations or reddening or whatever. Okay, got you.
Mhm.
Well, thank you. I wonder, Jack, did you have anything that you've been scribbling notes there? You've got 3 million questions now, right?
Yeah, I do have a couple. So this one is I have two for Paul here based on things you mentioned toward the beginning. So you talked about kind of managing your continence in the past. It wasn't always easy, and recently it has become more manageable. And I was wondering if you could share what changed or what allowed it to become a bit more manageable for you.
So yes, so when I first started with incontinence, there wasn't any disposable products available whatsoever. And I remember back in the early days, my grandmother actually improvised and made something that I could use. And also, being a male, there's other options that a male can use. And I remember my urologist prescribing a what they I don't know if you've ever heard of a McGuire urinal. It's a device that fits over the male anatomy, and there's a leg bag attached to that, and it's very uncomfortable and cumbersome, and may be fine for somebody that uses a wheelchair or paraplegic, but for somebody that's active, it's not very functional, and it failed numerous times on me. And that disposable product came out in the market, I believe, sometime early 80s or mid 80s, and it's been a boon since then. It has progressed in quality, and in the last 10, 15 years, they've improvised even more with the super absorbent polymers and different styles of products that a male can use. So that's the main reason why it's become easier for me to manage.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you. And another question for you is just for my own curiosity, how did you manage your incontinence while also running marathons? That sounds like an incredible challenge.
Yeah, I would wear a pull up, a light pull up, and I know that I leaked all along the way, but I didn't care. I think a lot of marathon runners do the same thing. So
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, I do. Okay. I have a couple more questions. This one was based off of a comment that Twyla made. So I'll start with you, but I imagine maybe Beth and Paul, you may have comments as well. Twyla, very early in the discussion, you mentioned how you choose to disclose to other people that you are managing incontinence. And I was wondering how you decide to make that decision, or maybe now it's not even a decision, it just happens, but is there a way that you go about kind of deciding who you would or would not share that with?
Well, I took part in a project of creating a booklet that helps people understand in their own minds who they need to disclose to and what the priority is, how they think they'll react, and what the benefits are of each class of people: family, friends, coworkers, bosses. If you have to have accommodation about using the restroom. I actually spoke to a lady. I was in the checkout at a store and had my incontinence products there. And I said to her, I'm going to have to hit the toilet before I get on the road and have to drive 16 miles home. So, and she said, oh yeah, I understand. And I said, yeah, how does that work for you? Because she was at least as old as I was. And she said, well, they have to understand that if I put my light out, she presses a button and somebody has to come relieve her. And it's a company that I don't think of as being particularly friendly to their employees. So I was impressed with the fact that she said, if I have to go and they don't get there, I just shut my register down and leave because I have to go.
Yeah.
And so that's an accommodation that has been reached between her and the employer. But it has helped me. Like I did a podcast with some people from the AUA that was broadcast then. And then I was asked to do a MedMD. No, I can't think of it's online medical little films.
Okay. Yeah. I think maybe MedMD. That sounds right. That sounds
Yeah.
familiar.
WebMD.
Oh, WebMD.
WebMD.
Thank you.
Web,
Well,
WebMD. I forgot the first part.
There we go.
And it was, once I decided I was going to be able to do it, and it was two guys that came out to do the filming. One was the producer and one was the photographer. And by the time we got done, I was actually in the middle of the wrap up when I had to get up, and I said, I've got to stop for the moment. I have to go. And they're like, well, that's appropriate. We can sure use that. And in talking afterwards, when we went to Broke for lunch, they admitted that they themselves felt that they had some level of incontinence when they talked about coming up from Atlanta to where I live in Tennessee, that, they had to make frequent stops for themselves. And they started to say, wait, do I have some level of incontinence too? It's fascinating. Over the period of time, I've realized how much easier it is if people around me do know, and you're maybe not going to blab to everybody, but the people that need to know, it's way better if they do.
Yeah. Beth, Paul, I don't, did you care to answer the question?
Yeah, I think, I've always had a very relaxed attitude about it, and so did my parents. Both became incontinent in their late 80s. And if you can be relaxed about it, have a sense of humor about it, I think that puts others at ease about disclosing it. And I'm sure there would be instances where I feel like it isn't somebody's business to know about it. But I think the more that we can be comfortable with it, discuss it, and remove the stigma around it, that benefits everyone. Because we just were recently looking at a study where we're looking at 78 million women in the United States who have some form of incontinence. That's a lot of people who are struggling with the same thing you are. So if you can be relaxed about it, open about it, it helps everybody. So that's going to be my attitude going forward.
Yeah, that's a good one.
I have a colleague that's in her early 50s that over the last couple of years has experienced some significant incontinence. And she's come to me because I've always been open with her. She's come to me and opened up with me. She was relaxed and comfortable in discussing that with me. And she wouldn't share that with any other colleagues or even the manager. And so she's going to be having surgery next week. And, she's told me all about the problem that she has and the surgical intervention that's planned. And, I told her, I said, well, I'll do anything I can to help you out with your work while you're recuperating. And so she was really open. And that's because I was open with
Yeah.
everybody, shared my story with.
Yeah. That's the difference it can make.
Yeah.
And I'm sure once in a while you're going to run across people who are jerks about it. And it's not possible to avoid the occasional jerk in life. But I think most people are better off for being open and having a more relaxed attitude about it, and even being able to laugh about how much time it cuts into your day having to go in and out of the bathroom. But it's worked better for me now that it's really an issue. The more people that know, the easier it is.
Yeah. It must be a real issue for younger people and peer pressure.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was younger, that's what I remember a lot of is peer pressure and wanting to be like everybody else, and I couldn't be. As we get older and more mature, I think you become accustomed to living your life, whether you have lemon handed to you and you just make lemonade out of it. That's all.
Yeah, it's a good attitude.
Well, there we are. Do you know, it's been great to share with you folks again. I'm just so grateful to you for being willing to share your insights and your experience. It's so important to those of us who are trying to make things better than they are, to reach better understanding. And I think one of the things that always fascinates me in this is that although you've all mentioned essentially the same kind of issues as we've gone along, they play out differently for each of you. And they play out differently depending on the day and the time of day as well. I mean, I'll always remember Paul with his selection of 6 products that he selected from, for example. And I think I like to think there's been an increasing realization over the last few years that actually this market is a good deal more segmented than everybody figured at the beginning, where there was a kind of, this is our incontinence product, it's for everybody, any age, either gender, any severity, etc. And there's much more realization that there is not one size fits all, not just in terms of body shape and size, but in terms of priorities and lifestyles and how things play out for you. And I think there is an increasing realization of that. And I think the kind of stuff that you've shared over this last hour or so has just highlighted that wonderfully. And I think people will value listening to what you have to say. So we're really grateful to you for being willing to do this. I'm guessing Jack would probably want to add his thanks in there too.
Yes, thank you so much, you three, for your willingness to share and open up about your experiences and your thoughts on the products, the insights you shared. I found them valuable as someone working in the absorbent product industry. I can only imagine our our customers and listeners who are actually making the products would find that interesting as well. So really appreciate your willingness to share. Alan, thank you for being willing to moderate and use your vast experience to help facilitate the conversation. So thank you, all 4 of you, for your time. Just like with our last panel interview, I'm not sure how you could hear those stories and the feedback from the panelists and not think that, just maybe, there are some areas of improvement for the products you make. Whether it be a pull-up product that is more convenient to remove and dispose of in public, like Paul requested, a product that can absorb insults more quickly and spread it along the length of the core to avoid leaks out of the sides, like Twyla requested, or less bulky and more discreet products that don't sacrifice absorption, like Beth mentioned. There's certainly no shortage of ideas out there for better products. So, hopefully, what you heard from these 3 panelists, on top of what you heard from our 3 European panelists a few weeks ago, will leave you with some great ideas for how your own products can be improved to better serve your consumers like Beth, Twyla, and Paul. Attached to Hygiene is brought to you by Bostic and is hosted by me, Jack Hughes. It is produced and edited by me with the help of Paul Andrews, Michelle Tonkovitz, Emery Chernus, and Nikki Ackerman at Green Onion Creative. Our theme music is by Jonathan Boyle. We'd like to extend a special thank you again to our moderator for today's discussion, Alan Cottenden, who you can find on LinkedIn. And a very, very big thank you to our 3 panelists for sharing their stories, Beth, Twyla, and Paul. As a thank you to the 3 of them, we made a donation on their behalf to their preferred incontinence-focused charity, and we encourage you to do the same. And to help you do that, we have listed their preferred charities in the show notes of this episode. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.